Hi, I'm Paula Miller with the Sweetland Digital Rhetoric Collaborative, and I'm here today with the Rhetorical Writing 2 MOOC team from The Ohio State University. We're joined by Ben McCorkle, who is over. Hi, Ben. Ben is over at the OSU Marion campus. He's an associate professor there. We're also joined by Scott DeWitt. Scott DeWitt is an associate professor at OSU, and he's also the vice chair of rhetoric, composition, and literacy. And then we're joined by a large portion of the rest of the MOOC team. You'll see the four of them there. We have from left to right Chad Iwerts, who is a PhD student in Rhet Comp and Literacy. We have Kay Halasek, who's an associate professor in the English department. We have Cynthia Self, who's a humanities distinguished professor. And we have Mike Blancato, who is a PhD student in rhetoric, composition, and literacy. So let's get started. All of you have been hard at work facilitating this MOOC. It's been going on for, what is this, like the second iteration now? So I'm really interested in hearing about what drove you to create the MOOC and what potential you see in the future for MOOCs in facilitating the teaching of writing.
I think it would be a good idea for Kay to start this one because she was the catalyst for our involvement here at OSU.
Well, I think, Paula, in some ways there's a very simple answer to your question, which is our Associate Provost asked us to apply for a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation grant. And my feeling is he's a good friend, but it's also if I get a request from an Associate Provost, I'm typically going to try to follow up on it. And so in November of 2012, we came across, were informed about this call from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for general education MOOCs, and they were funding general education MOOCs in both writing and mathematics. And so we submitted a proposal based on that for a second level writing course, which is eventually then what we've taught, what we've now offered 2 times. But when that call came out and I reviewed it, I just sent an email out to the English department Rhet Comp faculty asking if anyone was interested. And Ben and Susan and Cindy and Scott replied that they were. And so we sat down and in 2 weeks actually wrote up the grant application. I think thinking we probably didn't really have much of a chance at it, but then we were funded, which then prompted us to actually create and offer the MOOC. But I think behind, and Scott and Ben and Cindy can answer individually what their motivations were, but I think I realized the possibility both for investigating the question of whether writing can be taught at scale or what can sort of translate from our face-to-face pedagogies into a MOOC platform in terms of the teaching of writing. And I think we were also motivated, if I'm remembering those early questions or early conversations correctly, about the possibilities for research. What might we be able to find out from this corpus of student texts, and they were going to be in the tens of thousands potentially, that we might be able to examine, against which we could ask a series of questions about teaching writing, learning about writing, about collaboration among students, about how peer review might function in a kind of anonymous and massive system. So there were a number of research questions that we were interested in investigating, and I think there were also a number of questions we were interested in investigating because we recognized they were based on assumptions that we have made as a discipline, but haven't really interrogated. And I know we've actually written on that particular question about the doxa of the teaching of writing that we began to investigate. So that would be my answer, or at least initial answer to that question.
I would add to that we were also interested in how teaching and learning might happen in digital environments, because OSU in the Department of English hadn't at that point taught classes fully online or hadn't explored those digital environments, teaching and learning environments as fully as we'd like to. We teach lots of courses in the department that use digital tools, and Scott DeWitt has been foundational in helping us design classrooms and use computers. But teaching solely online is a whole different territory. So we wanted to explore that territory a little bit and think about how digital environments might shape teaching and learning.
I might add to this answer too, just to talk about kind of an obligation I was feeling to the field at this time. If you remember when we first launched this, there was a lot of press about MOOCs, and not a lot of it coming from inside the academy was all that positive. People were very concerned about what MOOCs were going to do to universities and what that meant for teaching and learning. And I think for me, I tend to go into things feeling a little bit more optimistic and wanting to ask some really important questions. And so in a lot of ways it was intellectual curiosity, in a lot of ways it was recognizing that what was this conversation that was happening about MOOCs was not necessarily going to go away, and I didn't think that MOOCs were going to go away. So I had to ask the question, if not us, who else was going to jump into this? And I felt like we were the people that could actually design a really great class, that we could ask the really important questions, we could work with this data. And so it's been a really interesting adventure. You know, at that time I had only been hearing about MOOCs in the press. I had never seen a MOOC. I certainly had never taught a MOOC before. So I was really going into this not really understanding at all how MOOCs operated or what the potential was for them.
And do you know that at that time, as Scott was saying, the people who were talking about MOOCs and much of the discussion about the fear surrounding MOOCs was not coming from people who had taught writing in MOOCs, because there were no writing MOOCs. So much of the discussion was happening in the absence of any evidence or the absence of experience in teaching writing in that environment.
And it was during those early conversations, in fact, that we were having, I think Kay even said something along the lines of, if we don't get ahead of it, it will get ahead of us, right? And whether we're talking about the field or whether we're talking about our particular institution, which is very interested in kind of exploring options of online delivery, if we don't have a voice early on in that process, then things start to take shape and get put in motion in ways that we lose control over. So I think it was important politically to interject it. And disclaimer, I'm the furthest thing from a hippie, but the original mission of the MOOC, you know, the idea of providing cheap or free access to higher education to people all over the planet, you know, to be able to connect with these people in ways that they might not otherwise have the opportunity to, and I wouldn't have the opportunity to, I think is, you know, it really excited me to be a part of that kind of project.
Well, I am a hippie, and believe me, that was a big motivation. It's the democratizing notion of this kind of, or potential of this kind of environment. And as we go on, we can talk a little bit more about that, that opening up. Scott has thought a lot about MOOCs, and one of the things he says is that the O in MOOC, massively open online classes, doesn't refer necessarily to size, but it refers to an open, radical way of thinking about teaching through classrooms that extends beyond the walls of a bricks and mortar institution.
Interesting. All right. So that kind of leads into my second question. I'm going to pull up a picture. Let's see. And present to everyone. Can you all see that?
Yep.
So this is a map that was created collaboratively by students in the 2013 spring class. And it kind of shows us, let's see if I can scroll through it here. It gives us a sense of where every student is from in the MOOC. And you know, they're all over the world. We've got, yeah, people from all over the place. So, let's see if I can get back to the Google.
Well, Paula, I would, while you're navigating back, I would say it's not every student in the MOOC. It's the students who put their pin on the map Eventually, we had 32,823 students in that particular MOOC from more than 100 countries. So that shows just some of them. I would also say that these students spoke about 112 different languages, and only 37% of the students claimed English as their first language when we taught that first iteration.
And those numbers are very similar for, not in terms of raw numbers of students, because we were down, I think, to about 18 or 20,000 students in the second iteration. But the other statistics hold in terms of L2 learners who didn't identify English as their primary language, and the number of countries, although I think it increased to about 170 countries represented. And of those students, and these demographics come from Coursera, about 30, I think it was 37 or 38% were from developing nations.
What Coursera calls
economies.
Emerging economies. And so that was an interesting, I mean, it speaks at least partially to the issue of that democratizing of education, because we did see a broader range of, or it made at least accessibility to the course. A higher number of countries represented, and then individuals from emerging economies who were able to avail themselves of the course online, as Ben pointed out, at no cost to them. As long as they had the technology available to them, and of course there would be cost on their end for potentially for the use of computer and time and so forth.
So have you noticed anything interesting about maybe the difference in demographics between the last iteration and this current one, or anything interesting you've noticed about the people who are in the course this semester?
Here's what I'd say. I would notice similarities at a large granular level. That is, there are a lot of people in the world interested in becoming better writers and speakers of English. A huge number, so many that we're never going to be able to deal with all of these people. They're very hungry, and often they're professionals. So we were not dealing with 18-year-old students in our classes. We were dealing with tourism experts. We were dealing with a car driver. We were dealing with dentists and attorneys. We were dealing with teachers, and we were dealing with people who already had a degree, but who had no other motivation in this world except to become a better writer of English. How cool is that? To have a class full of folks like that.
Mm-hmm.
That was an adjustment we had to make early on, or at least I did, but we talked about it conspicuously. We were using words like student early on, and we realized that was so inadequate based on these demographic data, because people are professional, because people's point of entry into MOOCs varies from the individual to individual. Some people are invested in taking the entire course. Some people prefer to graze. The overall dynamic of that is so different from a course that it became apparent to us very early on that it's not a class full of students, but it's a community full of active writers and participants. I mean, it was a pretty eye-opening moment for me, at least, when we had that realization.
And I think that moment that Ben is talking about is like really one of the most interesting moments that I experienced in developing the course, is that you think about how if we teach at a kind of a bricks and mortar university, is that we get a sense of the demographics of the university, and so we start designing courses without really looking at the individual students who might be signing up for the courses. We have course descriptions, and we go into creating a syllabus and a sequence of assignments. And the timeline in our first iteration was pretty short in the development. We were working really hard and really fast and really furious to get this course going, and we had been meeting for quite some time developing the course. And then the way that things work with a provider like Coursera is that the course goes online. It doesn't go live, but students can start to enroll in the course. And we had already started to develop the course when this demographic information started coming in. And that was an experience that I've never really had too much as a teacher. I mean, we all make adjustments in our courses once we start to get to know our students a little bit. But this was very interesting, the kind of information that was coming into us, and we were making some pretty big changes early on in that moment because of the information that was coming to us about who the students were going to be in the class.
You know, Bourdieu would call this habitus at work, and that's what it was. We had become habituated to a certain kind of student, and our disposition, the whole disposition of this institution, is to think of students in that way. And that's why we had subscribed to this narrative about teachers being the expert in classes, students being the learners, us being in control of the curriculum, students following a curriculum, everybody doing the same assignments in a lockstep. We had all these stories, all these teacherly stories. We knew what they were, we knew how they were going to go, and we were rocked back on our heels by those demographics. Scott and Ben have said it in a lovely way, but it was an eye-opening experience to realize that we were not always the experts, that we couldn't teach everybody in this room, that we weren't the only people who were going to be in control of the curriculum, that all of our assignments were equally as important to every one of these 32,000 students, and that they didn't come into our class, complete our class, and leave our class in the same way. And Kay can talk a little bit, I think, about coming and going in the class, and enrollment, and what people have called dropping out. That changed too.
Well, you know, a lot of the conversation, and still, the conversation revolves around what some individuals will refer to as the high dropout rate. And I think in our case, somewhere between 3 and 4% of the students actually who began the course completed all of the entire series of assignments and met all of the obligatory elements of the course to complete it to get a Coursera certificate. And you know, so people decry this, right? Why is there this huge dropout rate? And I have continually said, I think we're asking the wrong question. The question shouldn't be why are so many people dropping out of these courses, but why are so many people coming to them? And to me, that speaks back to what Cindy said just a couple of minutes ago about how anxious all of these individuals are to improve as writers and speakers of English, and how much they're willing to and desiring to, sharing their writing. I mean, to me, that was one of the epiphanies I had, was just how much they really desired the opportunity to have their work read, and then also to read the work of others. I think they recognized, maybe wanted first their writing to be read and get feedback on their writing, but I think they came to really value the peer feedback, for the most part, among those who were actively involved in that. And given this high dropout rate that we were sort of facing, we created a kind of a disenrollment survey that Coursera sort of tied to our course. So we just asked one simple question, which was, if you are disenrolling from the course, for what reasons are you disenrolling? And what we found from that, we had something like 2,000 individuals complete that in the first iteration of the course. I haven't actually looked at those data from the second iteration. Of the 2,000, somewhere above 80% said, either I have too much, I don't have the time right now, life circumstances have sort of intervened, or they simply said they were just dropping in to see what the course was like. Others indicated that it wasn't quite the course that they wanted, but very few of them, and I don't remember the percentages here, Paul, I apologize for that. Some very few of them indicated that there was too much work, or that the course didn't meet their particular needs. So the majority of people left not because of the course or course content, but simply because they had so many demands on their time that they didn't feel that they could contribute to it. But I'm just fascinated by this idea that there are tens of thousands of individuals and more, right, probably out there who want to work on their writing. And that was one of the things that was sort of most gratifying to me, was the idea that what we provide as teachers of writing is a commodity. Use a capitalist sort of term here, is a commodity. It's something, it's a skill, it's a valuable resource that a lot of people are interested in. And availing themselves of.
These people don't stop learning. You know, the thing that we have to realize is that it's their learning is not on our schedule. So these people might be older, they are professionals, they've finished an education, many of them are college graduates, and they drop in and out of these courses, especially free courses, simply to sample the kinds of learning that they can get at a particular moment or time or situation in their lives. It is not a lifetime, it's not a course time commitment, it's a lifetime commitment to learning.
Well, I think you're going to say Michael was just visiting the site today, and you saw that we ended on like November 22nd or 23rd.
Yeah.
And people enrolled in the course.
They're still watching the lectures. They're still like taking a look at the discussion boards. But one of the most amazing things to me about this MOOC, especially in the second iteration of the MOOC, is that the writing doesn't stay on Coursera. We organize it migrates. We organize the second iteration around the theme, like writer with a cause. And so we have a lot of what we call level up assignments that encourage students to go out and publish their work in the world. We got an email from one student who just said she was very pleased. She submitted something that she wrote for the course to a publication. It got accepted, and she got money out of it. 72 years old.
72 years old. This was her first publication. And she published it out of our MOOC.
Yeah, it's awesome.
She got paid. And she got paid.
So just real quick, I want to welcome Susan Delagrange to the chat. Susan is an associate professor at the OSU Mansfield campus.
Hi, sorry to be late.
Oh, that's all right. So we were just talking a little bit about the kinds of students who take MOOCs, and Mike was telling us about a student who actually published, which is really exciting. So I'm going to jump down. Responding to writing is often challenging when we teach writing, and managing so many students in a MOOC and responding to all that writing, I mean, it'd be impossible for a team of this size to do that. So to respond to that need to respond to writing, you created the WEX, the Writers Exchange, and students respond to their own writing. So talk a little bit about what sort of, how you help students learn how to respond to one another's writing on such a massive scale, and what's been interesting about the way that they use the Writers Exchange.
Scott's up.
Well, and I hope that everybody else will chime in on this too. So the development of the Writers Exchange was in response to exactly the scenario that Paula has set up, is that there's, not only is it impossible for instructors to respond to all that writing in a MOOC, but it's really not the way a MOOC should be designed to begin with. We want students to actually be providing feedback to one another. And it's all driven by the idea that we remember as teachers those, and we still have these experiences, that when we respond to a piece of writing, while we're providing that kind of feedback, we're also reflecting on our own writing practices, and we're thinking about how we might actually do something differently in our own writing. And we remember that, especially when we were very young teachers, our first experiences. So we want to make sure that when we are asking students to respond to their own write to their peers' writing, that it's about providing helpful feedback, but it's also about reflecting on their own writing so that they themselves can become better writers. And many of the MOOC providers have peer review systems that are built into their platforms. But we wanted to make sure, and I think that to their credit, they've created these platforms to meet the needs of many different courses across many different disciplines. They can't create a different set of peer review tools for every single discipline, for every single course. And so, they've done that, and to their credit, I think that they've provided some interesting tools for instructors, but we really wanted to create a peer review platform that was very much about teaching writing and very much about some of our ideas as compositionists about what is the value of peer review and what can we teach students about providing feedback to their peers and also reflecting on their own writing. So that requires us to spend a significant amount of time talking to students about what we do as writing teachers. What are the moves that we go through when we respond to student writing? And so we created what we've actually been calling it's kind of a training guide for students. And we asked them it's their first experience at doing peer review in a very no-stakes way. They're not actually responding to a peer's writing, and then they get to compare the review that they give to a sample paper to what we've called an expert review, and that's a review that we have done as instructors. And it's their first opportunity to kind of position themselves against with writing teachers and how they've responded to writing. But along with that is extensive instruction in how to respond to each other's writing, and not just simply saying, here's a list of questions and turning them loose on some peers' writing. It's actually saying, here are the outcomes of the assignment, here are the learning objectives of the assignment, and now what we want you to do is to think about how those learning objectives are being met or not being met in your peers' writing, and instructing them, giving them a very systematic approach to responding to writing. So we took a step back and we thought, as writing instructors, when I respond to a piece of writing, I try to describe what I'm seeing, I assess the strengths and weaknesses of what I'm seeing, and then I provide suggestions for how you might make that better. And so we've actually created a very systematic approach that for each learning objective that they're asked to respond to, they actually go through those moves of describe what you see, assess the strengths and weaknesses of the writing, and then provide feedback, some suggestions for how you might make that writing better. And then what we say is that this is just not a one-shot deal. We want you to do this throughout the entire course, because you're not going to learn this in one shot. You actually need to do this multiple times. So everybody in the class responds to for each assignment, responds to at least 3 other writers. And then there are 4 assignments in the sequence of the course. So they're doing this throughout the entire class. And the idea is for them to get better at responding, to become more reflective in how they're actually thinking about their own revision and their own writing, and to give them as much sustained practice as possible throughout the entire course.
So it actually, does anyone want to build on that?
Oh, I just wanted to say that when we were planning this, having conversations about this idea of robust training, that one of the hypotheses we were working with is that providing peer review and being a good writer weren't necessarily intricately linked. And in fact, our research has kind of showed that as we looked into the data. Sometimes some of the stronger peer reviewers or the peer reviewers who are rated more highly than others don't necessarily perform as well with their own writing. And the what's the word? Converse of that holds true as well. So it really reinforces this idea we have from the outset, is that regardless of how good a writer you are or aren't, peer review is its own special kind of habit of mind and skill sets that need to be developed on their own.
So next Wednesday, the Digital Rhetoric Collaborative is going to be hosting a Twitter chat about online teaching, and we've been talking a lot about online teaching. So I'm really interested in hearing y'all talk a little bit about what sort of overlap you see between online teaching with a more traditionally sized class, because I know many of you have experience with that, and teaching with a MOOC, and also the overlap between face-to-face classroom teaching and MOOC teaching.
Okay.
Well, I'm not, besides the MOOC, I don't think any of us has taught fully online unless Michael or Chad has. So I can't speak to the differences between the MOOC and the online environment there with tens of thousands of individual students and an online, say, 18 to 20 student course. We've talked about this, Paul, in terms of scaling up to the MOOC from our second level writing course at Ohio State, because the MOOC content was very similar to the content that that informed a second level writing course here at Ohio State. So we scaled up to the MOOC, and then we scaled back down. So we taught the MOOC in the spring of 2013, and then in the spring of 2014, just this past spring, we taught 3 sections of a hybrid version of 2367, in which we sort of imported really all of the learning assets, all of the materials from the MOOC back into the sort of, I don't know what you would call it, the locker of information, the course materials for the 2367 class. So in that respect, we were able to import back into our second level writing courses all of the materials and assets that we use. For example, introducing the PSA and visual rhetorics that Ben and Susan had created, came back in and made the sort of formed the central unit there on our public service announcement, where students were writing as writers with a cause about some cause that they had particular professional or personal interest in. One of the things that I know happens when we scale back down, when we're working with, and these were hybrid sections that were linked, so students across the 3 sections may be reviewing students' work in the Writers Exchange from other sections. But what we realized was that the anonymity of authors, just as one example, wasn't maintained, because the students were meeting face-to-face one day per week with us and then online the other day. And so if Chad read my paper and we were in the same section, he may well know it was my paper because I may have talked to him about it in a second. So we didn't have the complete anonymity of authorship. We still maintained the anonymity of the peer reviewers. So Chad could read my paper, comment on it, and give me scores, but I may still never know that it was Chad unless he self-disclosed that he was reading. And in that respect, despite that change in the level of anonymity, which I think is a great value of online learning, especially online learning that's distributed across institutions or across sections in a university, is really valuable, because I think writers and readers, or peer reviewers, all feel a kind of ease or a greater ease in responding. But the students on the OSU campus were generous readers, but they were also still very critical readers of one another, and they weren't really, I don't think that loss of anonymity or the potential loss of anonymity was at all problematic for them. What we did find was, when we scaled up, the other point I'll make, and then I'll let others speak to this, the other point, when we scaled up to the MOOC, I remember some of our early questions, one of our first questions was like, how do you teach writing completely online? I mean, what do we do? What do you do online? How do you replace a lecture? How do you replace a class, face-to-face class discussion? And so we were constantly sort of working against, as Cindy pointed out, some of our assumptions, right, about the habitus, what it was we typically did in the classroom, so we had to work with. But when we scaled back down from the MOOC, we actually found ourselves saying, what do we do when we meet with them face-to-face? Because we've become really already so accustomed to the values of online learning and using the technology in really robust fashion that we had to step back and ask the alternative question. And I think we found a good balance between those. We're still teaching hybrid sections here on the Columbus campus in our second level writing course. We'll be doing that again in the spring. But we do also now offer fully online first-year writing courses that also use the Writers Exchange.
That was, I mean, one thing I was going to mention also. I mean, again, like Kay said, I don't have experience teaching fully online or yet experience teaching hybrid, only really face-to-face, and then the brief experience that I've had so far with the MOOC. But I think what I wanted to add was sort of my preconceived assumptions about the differences that were going to take place between teaching online and teaching face-to-face. And I think in Kay's response there was a lot of this as well, but that there's this idea that things have to be tailored from what is already good in a face-to-face environment to then sort of like scale it up, or I mean, and maybe the assumption that I would have with that is sort of like make it more accessible in ways that might pervert that, what the better face-to-face environment in some ways. And I've been very shocked to find that that's not really the case at all. In fact, I think my teaching as an instructor in face-to-face environments has really greatly been enhanced by the opportunities that I've had in the MOOC. And I think one thing that I'm particularly excited about right now is WEX, and how WEX is being used in the first-year writing program, and how it's really creating a sincere and robust peer review experience for students in face-to-face environments that, I mean, frankly, peer review can't happen this way in face-to-face, and it's better through WEX in a lot of ways, and that wouldn't be possible, I think, if we didn't have online writing instruction or the interest that is here with this team in the MOOC. So, I mean, that's one thing that I think is really cool, and you might not think about that at first, that there's actually quite a bit of things going on in online education that are affecting all areas of teaching, not just online education.
This is definitely a permeable membrane both ways. I mean, we don't have a teaching or learning situation at university that isn't shaped by other teaching and learning situations online. They affect one another. We learn things about teaching and learning on a constant basis. If we're good, we keep learning about teaching and learning. If we get lazy, and I've got to say that I feel like I got lazy teaching face-to-face, I didn't have the perspective that I needed to see how unusual that teaching was until I started teaching MOOC. So I think that the benefit of habitus or dispositions is that they allow us to work every single day and predict what's going to happen. The drawbacks of habitus and particular dispositions is that they blind us or lull us into thinking that that nothing else exists. And that's when ideology is working its strongest, when you think that you know, when you think this is common sense, that's when you've got to stop yourself and go, ooh, this is a problem. And that's what the MOOC did for us. It made us stop and made us rethink from a different perspective.
So that actually leads really nicely into my last question. It's a pretty open one. So some of you are new to the MOOC, some of you have been doing it for the whole time. What's been interesting or challenging about the MOOC? Do you have any stories that you want to share with the audience?
I'll jump in. One thing, well, interesting is such a benign word, so I'll use that. The group dynamics, and I guess this is kind of the same in face-to-face classrooms as well, like learning to manage or negotiate or navigate group dynamics. I find myself thinking about this a lot in traditional classroom settings, having been in the MOOC, because what I find is that my attention is drawn by certain personalities in the MOOC, right? The high achievers, the ones who are really energetic and energized, the ones who are obviously kind of on point and smart and get it, but also the other loud students as well who might be gadflies or might be kind of like resisting in particular ways. So I guess you know, if we were to lump those all together, they're the ones that are the most active and talkative. And at that point, you know, I find myself going, am I neglecting the silence? Am I not being attentive enough or intervening enough with those voices who aren't kind of piping up? And so the MOOC gives you, because of the scale, a lot of room to kind of play around and navigate and subscribe to different discussion forum threads and participate in underlife kind of conversation in ways that you necessarily don't get to do in traditional classrooms. And but it's something that's kind of got me thinking when I do go into those traditional classrooms about how do I engage the students more effectively who don't pipe up, because oftentimes you find that they have things to say, and if you just press them a little, you'll find that out.
I guess, I mean, I might add, so again, like as a graduate student, really only been working on the MOOC for this one second iteration. But I mean, one thing that I have found to be particularly nice and helpful and reassuring is just how great the team is for the MOOC, and it's made me really realize that there are so many people out there who teach MOOCs by themselves. And I mean, again, like I'm just a graduate student, like I'm not even doing all the instruction for this MOOC. And this might just be me personally, but in terms of burnout, like we all have lives going on as well. And when you are trying to teach 20, 30,000 students all at the same time, I mean, no matter how much of a team you have, it's going to be impossible. But one thing that I can't even fathom is how people are able to or need to do this by themselves. I mean, that's a credit to them, I think, in a lot of ways.
That is why that's why I have remained working with the MOOC. We have weekly meetings of the MOOC team, and it's a time when we share all sorts of insights about how to run a project this size, what kinds of things are involved, how to approach teaching, what kind of attitude you take towards students and assignments, and how do you design environments for teaching and learning. That kind of exchange is so rare in institutions anymore. It's such a luxury. And if Bill and Melinda Gates helped us in any way, it was in providing us the luxury of collaborating with good and inventive colleagues who allowed us to see this grand experiment from different perspectives.
It's interesting. On one hand, you have to be really deliberate in the choices you make about how you structure the course in order to appeal to 20,000 students. But on the other hand, I think the participants themselves, like they make our job a little bit easier. They help each other out on the discussion board forums. But I'll find that I will go to a thread, someone will ask a question, and I'll go make a cup of coffee, get back, and the question will be answered by another participant. And so that does make our jobs easier. And they use rhetoric, they use writing. They're putting their writing skills into practice by helping each other and by conversing with each other in these forums.
And what Mike said, I mean, is also really closely connected to what Ben was saying about that kind of philosophy of intervention that we've all had to really think about, is that when we first started, I think we all felt really compelled, because this is what we do as teachers. We wanted to respond to every single question that was ever raised in the discussion forum, and it became quite apparent we couldn't do that, and that it was like exhausting to even try to do it. And so we kind of stepped back and thought about, like, well, what should our role be? And one of the things that we really decided was, like, let's have faith in the participants in the class. And it was amazing when we would just sit quietly, or as Mike said, if it's kind of the get up and get a cup of coffee philosophy, is like get up and just wait to see what happens. And you can come back and this conversation just unfolds, and they've not only answered questions, but they've raised new questions, and conversations have spun off in different directions.
You have to give up, don't you? I mean, in some ways, you have to be satisfied with just giving up the notion of control and letting things play out a little more on their own, and trusting to the ways in which human beings solve problems. If you can do that stepping back, I think you'll learn a lot from engaging in this kind of environment.
Fabulous. Any final thoughts? Well, thank you so much for being part of this conversation. It was so nice to talk with you. I want to give a little shout out to something that's going to be going on with the DRC next week. There we go. Can you all see that? There we go. So if you're interested in MOOCs and online teaching in general, we can continue the conversation next week. On Wednesday night, the DRC is going to be hosting an online Twitter chat at 8 o'clock p.m. It'll last about an hour. So come chat with us, come tweet with us, and we can keep talking about MOOCs and other kinds of online writing. So thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
We'll wrap this up.
Thank you, Paula.
Everybody.
Take care.
Nice.